I inherited my parents' old house about a year ago. As a single guy in his mid-20s, this was quite a windfall. My mom had died of a stroke in the upstairs bedroom, a room I now kept mostly locked up. I never knew my dad. He split before I was born, but the house was something he left my mom before disappearing. So, it was a house that's been in his family for generations, and it was the only piece of my father that I had left. My grandparents had been dead before I was born, and my father was an only child. That being said, there was no real family to inherit the family estate when he was pronounced dead, other than my mother and I. As an only child myself, my father hadn't really got around to siring any other brothers or sisters for me. I never really wanted for much. Dad's estate took care of the bills, my education, and the upkeep of the house. I always kind of wished that he had just stuck around if he'd gone that far, but I suppose it finally caught up with him. Mom always said Dad was eccentric, a scientist who studied weird stuff for a research facility, and whatever he did, it must have paid well because I had made it all the way through college without even touching the trust fund that my mom had set up aside for me. And now, I had an 8-bedroom, 3-bath mansion in need of some serious renovation. I decided to start with the attic. The attic had always intrigued me, even when I was a child. I used to like to play up there, looking into all the old chests, peeking into armoires, and scaring myself with make-believe ghosts. It was nice up there. A stained glass window that overlooks the street always made little rainbows on the wood floor just for me. I wanted to clean up a little bit, build an office up there so that I could do my accounting and bookkeeping in peace. The problem was that it was structurally unstable. The wall was a crumbling old brick, the mortar trying to let go for the last 40 years or so. I was afraid that it wouldn't take more than one good windstorm to knock it all in. I really wanted to fix it up and work my way down. As I started cleaning it out, I was delighted to find that the attic might actually pay for its own renovation. It was packed with old furniture and antiques that I found some interest with some of the local antique dealers. I took a few pictures on my phone and sent them to some of the antique shops, and they seemed all the more enthralled to get their hands on them. I separated off the things I wanted to sell, keeping a small pile of things I did not, and after a couple of days of men with dollies coming in and out of the house, I found myself about $25,000 richer. The old attic had more than paid for its facelift, and I started looking at supplies to replace the old brick with. I didn't know if I had to replace the beams behind it, but I suspected that I might. Mom told me that Dad had said that the attic was one of the few original parts of the house, which apparently had been built in the late 1700s. It was one of the first large homes to be constructed in the area, and his ancestors had received it from some fellow after working the land for him. They'd been less indentured servant and more live-in caretakers. The man had hundreds of acres, a large farm, and several dairy cows that needed to be taken care of. My dad's forebears and their children had been more than up to the task, having recently immigrated from Ireland. When he had left it all to them in his will, they had suddenly become very rich and very powerful in what was an up-and-coming part of the world. That would make the attic nearly 3 years old, and the fact that it was still standing was a marvel in itself. I had talked with a friend of mine who was a member of code enforcement for the city, and he had told me to be careful when I started taking down the bricks. He said he was pretty certain they wouldn't be load-bearing, but if the attic was as old as I said it was, then it could be an accident waiting to happen. I had been up in the attic during all kinds of weather, and I'd never seen as much as its sway in the wind. Whoever had built it had done an amazing job, and had certainly built it to last. As I set to work, taking down the first of the brick, I did so with an ear out in case I needed to run. I had barely set my hammer to work when I saw something sticking out between a loose brick. It appeared to be an envelope, an old and yellow thing that likely would have crumbled to nothing had it not been sealed up on the wall. I reached out for it, wiping masonry dust off of it as I looked at the front. It was signed to my child from Marcus Krim. It was dated 1934. This gave me pause. As far as I knew, there was only one Marcus Krim that had ever lived in this house, and that was my father. To my knowledge, though, he had not been alive in 1934. I set the letter aside, not really sure what to make of it, and I kept working. The wall appeared to be held up not by wooden beams, but metal beams. Ones that struck me as weird because the means to do so in the 1700s would have been difficult to achieve. They were crude metal beams, to be sure, but they were very thick and very sturdy, and had likely taken someone a very long time to put into place without a crane or some sort of tools. However, the architect managed it. This was tremendous. I would save a lot of my recent windfall by not having to replace the wooden beams that I had assumed would have been there, and decided the flaky wall was just a product of its time. I was halfway through the north face of the wall when I found another letter. The front of this one read, "To my child from Marcus Krim, 1984. The date of the letter seemed reasonable. My father would have been around 12 years old in 1984, but I doubted that he would be writing letters and putting them in the masonry. I set it aside, wanting to get back to work, but it was hard not to open it and see what it contained. This one looked a lot newer than the other one, and I suppose it had spent a lot less time in the wall. Why was my father leaving letters for me inside a wall in the attic? I didn't know, but I supposed that when I was done for the day, I might sit down and see what he had written me. By midday, I had found 5 other letters, and my curiosity was piqued. I had found one from 1984, one from 1934, another one from 1956, and another from 1890, and a 5th from 1854. They'd been stuffed into the wall behind those bricks, popping out as I smashed up the wall with my sledgehammer, and as I broke for lunch, I decided that it might be time to have a look at them. I didn't know if this was some elaborate joke someone was playing on me or not, but the idea of getting letters from a father that I'd never known was intriguing. Maybe the date was a code or something, and I wondered if there was some other treasure to be found in the house, besides the antiques in the attic. I decided to open the letter from 1984 first, it being the closest to today's date. Inside was a handwritten letter in what I recognized as my father's meticulous script. I had seen some of his journals in the library writing on physics and scientific theory, and I was familiar with the way that he wrote. He marked the envelope with a stamp, though I have no idea why, and it had been sealed with wax that crumbled as I broke it. Hello. As I have not yet learned your gender yet, your mother insisted this be a surprise. I will just call you Child. I suspect you have questions, and I wish I could answer all of them, but I fear this letter will be a poor explanation. Your mother may have told you that I was involved with an organization studying scientific principles. One of the principles they were very interested in was time travel. It wasn't something I believed in, but I was willing to take their money and study their theories. I thought the concept was so much hogwash, but as we began to make breakthroughs, I had to admit that there was merit to it. I began to get excited, thinking I might actually break the secret of passing backwards and forwards in time. On the day of testing, we all drew straws to see who would be the one to test the device. I drew the short straw, so I was placed inside the chamber. I pray they didn't send anyone after me because it appears that something's gone terribly wrong. I closed my eyes in 1998 and opened them again in 1984. We'd done it. We'd gone back in time, but there was a problem. I had no way to return, and it appeared that my means of time travel was unstable. I arrived in December of 1984, but 3 days later, I was in September of 1984. I was jumping backward in time. Little hops at first, but I suspect they might become progressively stronger as time goes on. I don't know how to contact you or if you'll ever find these letters, but I know the house has existed for at least 200 years. If I leave a letter in the attic somewhere, it's not likely to be stumbled across until someone is looking for something else. Maybe you'll find it. Maybe you'll know that I didn't abandon you and your mother. You'll know what happened. I'm going to break into your grandparents' house tonight and hide this in the attic. I remember that tonight was when they left me at a sitter's house and went to see a late movie. So there should be more than enough time to get in and leave the letter in the wall of the attic. I hope this finds you well, and I hope that you are well. Sincerely, Marcus Krim. I was speechless for a moment, not sure what to make of it. Was this real? I'd known my father was a little eccentric. Mother said that he towed that fine line between genius and crazy, but this was out there. Had my father been playing some elaborate joke before he left? He had been trying to trick a small child into thinking that his father was just a time traveler, not a deadbeat? I didn't know, but it only made me more curious to see the other notes. I shifted through them until I came to the one from 1956. It was the next one in chronological order, and it seemed the best place to pick up the story. I opened it with a finger, wincing as the old paper sliced me a little. But I sucked the paper cut as I spilled the paper onto the old desk, one that I had kept up here from the antiques. A few drops of blood spattered onto the blotter, but the letter was spared. And as I sucked at it, I read what he'd written there. Child, I've spent the last week shifting backwards every few days. Sometimes I'd stay in a spot for a few days, sometimes seconds, but it seems I'm destined to live my life backwards. I always seem to stay in the same town, the town I grew up in, and it's odd to watch the town slowly grow younger. Opening your eyes to see the town shrinking, a building at a time, I spent 2 weeks leaping backwards at various speeds, but when I finally came to rest in March of 1956, I felt jet-lagged. The town was half the size it had been. The cars are different from the turn of the century as they would be in the early 1900s. People looked at me funny, my clothes likely appearing strange, but my money still worked. The tellers would get a shock when they realized they had bills that wouldn't be circulated for 40 years, but I needed to eat. I didn't have a lot of money when I traveled, 100 and a couple of 20s in my wallet, but as the cost of things goes down, the money stretched a little further. Your grandfather, my dad, is so young. I saw him playing outside the house, a boy of maybe 10 or 11, and it was hard not to hail him and talk to him. I plan to break into the house again when the family is gone and leave this letter in the wall of the attic. I better do it soon. Who knows how long I'll have before I travel again. I hope you're doing well. I hope your mother is also well. It's strange to talk to someone you've never met, but I hope these letters shed some light on where I've been and why I haven't been in your life. I was beginning to think that these notes had been left by my mother, but how had she so expertly duplicated his handwriting? All of my father's journals were written like this, the same meticulous script, and it even sounded like the voice I had always given him when I read his journals. He'd sound like a scientist, like my science teacher had when I was in school. I reached for the next letter. I came across one from 1934. The envelope was ancient-looking. The outside yellowed, sealed in the same wax the others had been. The wax on this one was brittle with age, and it crumbled under the fingers as I broke it. I started to slide my finger under the adhesive, but looked in the desk till I found the letter opener that I remembered seeing there. A quick slash, and I had the note in my hand. Child, I went to sleep 2 days ago after delivering the letter to the wall, and woke up 60 years in the past. This was the longest jump I've ever made all at once. I had to write this one quickly before it sent me sailing off again. The town looks more like Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show than the bustling city that I remember. Main Street is here, as is the post office and the police station, but everything else has changed. There are stores, but they seem less grand than the ones here before them. The house is still here, and I can see my grandfather as he sits on the lawn with my grandmother, both of them in their senior year of high school. Grandpa will get his draft notice in 6 years, taking him out of the steel mill before the explosion that kills so many and probably saving me from never being born. Grandma will give birth to my father a year after that, and Grandpa will come back from France with a few scars and many stories to regale his son, and later his grandson. I never knew my great-grandparents. Not well, anyway. And it's odd to see them as they go about their lives. I've seen men going into the house for the past few days, men doing work on the study on the second floor, and I've managed to hook a pair of white overalls and caps from a clothesline. Tomorrow I'll mingle with them and drop this letter into the wall, if I'm not years farther from where I started then. I sorted the remaining letters, my work forgotten, I decided on the one from 1890. It was the next one in sequence, though the sequence was far out of whack now. My hands shook a little as I opened it with the letter opener. Fake or not, someone had gone to a lot of trouble to set this up, and the story was so good that I had to know how it ended. My work had been forgotten, the mystery too much for me to put down. As the wax seal fell to brittle shards on the desk, I took out the thick and uncomfortable paper that had been laid into the equally heavy envelope. Child. It appears I sealed my letter in the wall at just the right time. The house was fumigated the next day, and it would have been nearly impossible to get back in. I also traveled again 4 days later, and this one was one of my more hectic trips. I'd be stuck in a time for a day or two, but just as I would pen a letter, I'd be dragged backwards into something else. I've started trading my money for gold and silver as I go further back. I'll soon come into a time when paper money meant nothing, and then I might as well burn the notes to keep me warm. Gold, however, maintains its value, as does silver, and so I now have a few actual dollars left, and some mintings of gold and silver on my person. I've got them hidden in a backpack that also seems to travel with me. I wish I experimented with this a little more, but even though these letters are decades apart, I've really only lost a few months at most. It feels like, just like last week I opened my eyes in 1984, that I'm becoming worried that I might be slowing down a little. His last trip had brought me to 1890, and the town is little more than a general store, a saloon, and a collection of frontier businesses. I had to steal more clothes, my modern attire marking me as an outsider. I'm thankful that I traded for gold. My money would be useless out here, but gold is always useful. The house is still here too, but I've skipped 4 or 5 generations. The house is now a plantation, the land worked by field hands, and the house set considerably out of town. I went there to seek field work, but they thought that I was a cousin who'd come to call. They put me up, showing a lot of the old family hospitality I'd always heard about, which will make it easy to hide the letter. I hope I come to rest soon. I hope this stops. I go to sleep. I blink and my heart's filled with dread of where I'll be when I open my eyes again. I hope you're all well, and I hope you're living better life than I am. I exhaled, looking at the last letter. This one was marked 1854, and it was the last one I had. As I picked it up, a thought occurred to me. How many more letters could there be in these walls? How many more could there be that covered dates in between the ones that I'd found? I was no longer skeptical, quite the contrary. I was hungry for more. And as I split this one open, I held the brittle paper gently, afraid that it would fall apart before I got the chance to read it. Child, the traveling is definitely slowing down. I spent 3 months with my forebears in 1890, and after that I spent a month in 1880, 2 months in 1870, and now I've landed in 1854. I've returned to the house again, claiming to be a cousin, and it's odd to see the same people I saw in 1890, 40 years younger. The matron who invited me in is now a mere slip of a girl. Her brother, maimed in a war, is now a healthy young man, passionate about states' rights and the laws that govern man. I'm embarrassed to report that the field hands I saw earlier have been replaced with slaves, but I suppose that was to be expected. They accepted me into their home again, and I suppose I'll stay here until I travel again. I hope you don't hate me too much. There it was. That was it. But I felt like I knew where I could find the other letters. It was late into the night when all the bricks were torn down, and I looked amongst the rubble for any signs of paperwork. I had started out being very careful, an archaeologist looking for old bones, but after hours of fruitless plinking, I began to level the wall with abandon. I no longer listened for the groan of old boards or the crash of the ceiling. The iron bracers held the attic up this long. They could do it a while longer. I searched and searched, looking for something. When I saw a metal glinting beside a bracing, I went to it and found a lockbox made of rusted old iron. It was a relic. The metal, so old, it began to disintegrate in places, and I was careful as I knocked the lock off and pulled at the lid. I didn't think it would open for a terrible moment, but as it squealed apart like a funhouse door, I saw a tube inside with a wax cap on the end. Someone had written 1775 on the outside, and I opened it carefully as I dumped the fragile paper out beside the rest. If the paper from the last one had been fragile, then this one was almost elven. It felt like skin. It was so thin that I could almost see through it. The ink was thick and flaky, clearly done with a real pen, and as I read it, I realized I'd come to the end, or maybe the beginning. Child, 1770. I've come back as far as I'm able. The last year was a series of travels, back and back and back. Sometimes I might get as much as a week in one time, but usually it was hours. It seems, however, that I've come to a rest at last. I've been living on the land that will one day be our family home, and I realize there's no old benefactor waiting for us to come to settle here. The land is mostly trees, but I've come to the spot where our house will soon stand. I went into town, the closest town I could find, and purchased it for what I would consider a pittance. The man at the trade office seemed surprised by the amount of gold I had on my person, but it seemed like nothing to someone in our time. I had co-workers who'd begun laying gold back for the coming millennium. Sure that the banks would crash and money would be useless, but out here, money is nothing but paper and ink. I was able to buy 100 acres and secure enough supplies to build the house and start the farm. I've shown them how to make metal beams, something I took for granted in my world of metal and glass. House will be strong, and no wooden beams to break and bend. And I secured enough strong backs to help me build it. In 1773. The construction's done, for the most part. The attic's difficult to build with their current level of technology, but I think we did okay. The house looks like it always has. And as I set up the barn and the fields, I began to loan money to those who are in need. The interest alone has made me wealthy. I've become quite well known in the area. The workers I hired have settled land nearby, and I believe they're establishing the town that will one day encompass this house. 1775. I've lived here for 5 years and have not traveled once in all that time. I think perhaps whatever moved me has dissipated, and I'm now here for good. The town's doing well. They have established a general store and are now a steady trade route on the road west. I have men who work the land for me, who tend the cows and the sheep, and I sit in my mansion and rake in the profits. Life is good, but I'm aware of what's to come. I'm no fool. And I know where this path will take me. 1780. I saw them today. They came to the house, asking for work. My 8-time great-grandfather came onto the porch with his hat in his hand and begged me for a job. Said his wife would be happy to be my cook, and his children would help with the farm. That sounded fine. Most of the young men who helped me build this house and work the land have gone to fight in the Revolutionary War, and I've been struggling to keep up with the chores around here. Thomas has 10 children, a good big Irish Catholic family, and the youngest is old enough to help with the day-to-day affairs of the farm. I agreed to hire them on immediately. I'm the generous benefactor my family legend speaks of, and I'll be dead in the next 15 years. I may have stopped traveling, but I can feel my body aging faster than it should. 15 years is a long time. But I'm sure it'll seem like no time at all to me. 1785. The war has been over for 2 years, but a lot of the men who went to fight haven't come back. I'm going to finish this letter and put it in the attic while I still have the strength. I'm barely 50. I look like a man in his 70s. I can barely make it up the stairs on a good day. I don't know how I'll live another 10 years, but I know that if I don't get this into the wall, it may be my last chance. It's sobering to remember that I'm the one who's responsible for my family's wealth. The one who made it possible for those who came before me to live in relative ease. But I suppose that's the way of it. If you ever find this, I hope you won't hate me too much. It's not my intention to leave you, but I see now that I would have likely been a terrible father. My work held too much of my attention to ever take you to a baseball game or sit with you and spend an afternoon on the couch. I would have neglected you. And for that, I'm sorry. This, it appears, is my gift to you. Use it well. You never know when you might be called upon to make your own history. I love you. And I hope you're well. Yours always, Marcus Krim. I sat in the desk and just looked at the collection of letters. It was my dad. He built the house. He had set our family up, and then he died. He died without telling them who he was. It was unthinkable. And I realized I had no way to prove any of it. There'd be no records going back that far. The original owner of the house had lived before the town did, and any receipts of the bill of sale paperwork, they would not have survived. I suddenly wished Mom was here. She would have wanted to see these letters. She would have likely believed them without question. I wished a lot of people were still here. There was no one to substantiate these claims. I wondered if this was how Dad had felt, as he walked to town to begin building this house. He'd felt so utterly alone, knowing that his only real family was still 10 years away in a place that he'd never seen. I felt so alone, so utterly desolate. And I sat there looking at the letters and thinking until the sun made rainbows the stained glass. As it did, I saw them fall on something I'd missed. It was wedged far in the back behind one of the bracers, and I walked toward it like it might bite. There was another tube, this one carefully placed so that it wouldn't be jostled or broken when it came time for repairs. I opened it, and inside was a beautiful oil painting of a man sitting in the parlor downstairs. The blues looked a little different, the curtains in the style of the late 1700s, but the man sitting in the winged-back chair was someone I knew, someone I'd seen his picture of before, but he had traded his white coat for a dark, rich suit. His hair was short, more orderly, and he'd grown a mustache. But I'd know him even if he had a beard. It was my dad. And I knew what I would find when I carefully flipped the painting over. Marcus C. Rim. Commissioned 1774 by Warren Fritz. It's framed downstairs now, as are the letters the dad left for me. And I think I cherish them more than the house, as well as the knowledge that Dad never really left us. He's always been there, making sure our way was smooth from a gap of generations. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video. I want to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. This past year has been rough. I've been gone for quite a while trying to get things organized for my own life, and Patreon subscribers, you guys who subscribe everywhere, this has kept me afloat in turbulent waters. So I want to give a very special thank you to Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, Disciple, Strategy Wolf Emoji, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Djenna, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yarghoul, VerbalHorror, Amber Clark, Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Corbin Dallas, Estebean, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Dirt Diver 030, Voice of Sand, Psychomel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Sashi Suzaku, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all you guys and everybody who's included in the description down below, thank you so much for everything that you guys have done for me, and thank you so much for being here when times get difficult and I can't always be around to make content. I really appreciate your support, and I cannot thank you enough. And that goes to everybody who watches these videos, that goes to everybody who's subbed here, and anybody who has ever liked a creepypasta story ever. I wish you all the best. Sweet dreams.